What's up? Welcome to episode 2 of Garments and Tycoons, the show where fashion meets business. I'm your host, Stefan Adams, and thank you again for joining us. I'm excited to do this episode because I'm going to be covering the illustrious career of one of fashion's most celebrated icons. And he's my personal favorite fashion designer outside of myself, Mr. Tom Ford. So, in this episode, we'll be covering his early days as an entry level fashion designer to moving on and revolutionizing things at Gucci to then going on and creating his own $1 billion empire. So, very exciting episode to, go through the journey of a fashion legend. But before we get into all of that, I think it's appropriate to start by me sharing how Tom Ford even got on my radar and why he's my favorite designer in the first place. So let's take it back to maybe '08, '09. I'm in high school, either a sophomore or a junior, but I just solidified that I'm going to have a career in fashion, specifically as a fashion designer. And I'm having a conversation with my mom. Shout out to my mom. And I said something to the effect of, yeah, I would love to design at a fashion house, but I'm sure that'll be tough to do because I can imagine that they only hire wherever they based at. And she was like, "No, you should look into somebody named Tom Ford. He from Texas and he used to work with Gucci." And I was like, "Okay, bet. Let me look into him." So I looked him up, and from there, man, the rest is history. So let's talk about the brand itself, the Tom Ford brand. I really rocked with the aesthetic of the brand. It was, clean lines, very tailored clothing. He was only doing menswear when he first got on my radar. Well, menswear and beauty and eyewear. But in terms of clothing, just men's. So the suits were fly, very eye-catching designs and neckties. Like I was very into that sort of men's fashion at that time. And for me, even being at a place where I knew this is what I love, but I lacked the language, I could just already tell that if I was able to create my own brand at that time, it would have sort of mirrored the aesthetic of Tom Ford, but with my own from my own point of view and with my own DNA, of course, because um, I draw inspiration from others, but I don't copy. So it's just say that. But from there, I would start doing more research and um, looking into Tom Ford, the man. And I became a fan of his because what stood out to me is that not only was he creative, but he had great business acumen as well. And I'm someone that all the people, the business figures that I admire, that's like something that they all have in common. It's like they're creative, but they have great business sense as well. So think Jay-Z and Ronnie Fogg from the Kith brand, from example. So, with me building my own brand and being focused on that, I'm always being intentional about um walking that line of both sides. So, yeah, that's just a quick intro of how Tom Ford was placed on my radar and why I rock with him so much. So, now let's, dive into his career and let's start at the beginning. So, Tom Ford, as I mentioned earlier, from Texas, but he grew up in New Mexico, and after high school, he relocated to New York where he attended NYU for a period of time, left NYU to relocate to Los Angeles to pursue a career in acting. Felt like the acting career was too slow paced for him. So then he moved back to New York, enrolled at Parsons, which is a creative school, and he chose architecture as his focus. But towards the his last year at Parsons, he scored an internship with a fashion brand called Chloe, and he was in their press division. And that's when he realized that fashion was what he really loved. And then he also identified that when he was working on his architectural projects, he found himself often being more concerned with what the figures and what the aesthetics of his projects look like more so than the overall projects itself. So when he was getting ready to finish at Parsons, he started going around to apply for jobs. And instead of telling people that he graduated from Parsons in architecture, he told them that he graduated focusing in fashion. So that leads me to a fun fact. So let's go to 1988, right? He goes and he scores a job with Perry Ellis, and he's hired by Marc Jacobs. So a lot of people don't know that Tom Ford was hired at Perry Ellis by Marc Jacobs, where he focused on women's denim. He did that for about 2 years, but then he grew tired of American fashion. And there's a quote from an interview that he did with with the New York Times a while back that I would like to share. He said, if I was ever going to become a good designer, I had to leave America. My own culture was inhibiting me. Too much style in America is tacky. It's looked down upon to be too stylish. Europeans, however, appreciate style. So that leads to my next point. Fast forward to 1990, Tom Ford was hired at Gucci. So he relocated from New York to Milan, where he was hired as a women's ready to wear designer with Gucci. And he was hired by Don Mello, who was the creative director at that time. And to put things into perspective, at the time when Tom Ford was hired by Gucci, Gucci then is not who it is today. Um, Gucci at that time was struggling. Nobody was really paying attention to it. They had like stupid licensing deals where they were making stuff. They were just making random things like matches and um, scotch, right? And the brand was just watered down. Dawn Mello, in an interview, she when she was discussing the hiring of Tom Ford, she said, "I was talking to a lot of people, and most didn't want the job, but Tom Ford took the risk anyway, so he saw value in the opportunity." And to also put things into perspective of how much Gucci was struggling. They were near bankrupt. And in the early 90s, Bernard Arnault, who is the CEO of LVMH, which is the parent company of Louis Vuitton and many other companies. I'll talk more about Bernard Arnault and LVMH in another episode. But in the early 90s, Bernard Arnault had the opportunity to buy Gucci for $400 million. But at the last minute, he backed out because he felt like Gucci wasn't worth anything. So keep that in mind for later in this episode when I talk about it. So Let's fast forward to 1994. It's 1994, and Gucci goes through some internal changes and shifts. They get a new CEO. The new CEO is a guy by the name of Domenico De Soleil, who had already been working with Gucci in their legal area. He handled taxes on for the American leg of the business. Well, he had the opportunity to get hired as the CEO, and one of his first decisions was to promote Tom Ford to creative director. So in 1994, Tom Ford, at the age of 32, he gets hired as the creative director of Gucci. His first collection really doesn't make a lot of noise with the press, but his second collection in 1995 is a hit. He incorporated things like velvet, plunging necklines, and just real provocative fashion ads, which is definitely something that he becomes notorious for being known for throughout his career. So he implements all of that and turn things around. Gucci goes from being overlooked and not talked about to now all the A-list celebrities at that time are wearing the brand on red carpets like Madonna, Gwyneth Paltrow, just to name a couple. Another fun fact is that Toni Braxton, in her Unbreak My Heart video, she's wearing a white dress that's Gucci by Tom Ford from his 1996 collection. So, yeah, Tom Ford at his creative director appointment, he turned things around. He handled things on the creative side while Domenico De Soleil handled things on the business operations. And so let's fast forward to the late 90s. So by the late 90s, Gucci's on fire, is booming. The success that Tom Ford and Domenico De Soleil experienced led them to um, a legal battle with Bernard Arnault. Mind you, I just told you in the early 90s, Bernard had the chance to acquire Gucci for 400 million, but he passed on it because he felt like it wasn't worth anything. But with the success of Tom Ford's creativity, he changed his tune. And so he secretly started acquiring stocks in the Gucci brand, right? He did it real low key. By the time that the Gucci team found out about it, it was damn near too late. And Bernard was like this close to doing a hostile takeover and acquiring Gucci. But Tom Ford and Domenico De Soleil didn't want any parts of dealing with Bernard because I guess it was like the the rumor or the reputation of Bernard Arnault at that time wasn't wasn't the best in terms of business. He was known for being a shark. One of his nicknames is the Wolf in Cashmere because he's just known for doing um, I don't know to say shisty, but just very like cutthroat. He was just serious about his business. And I'll talk about him more. I'll do a deep dive on Bernard Arnault and LVMH in a later episode. But yeah, he was a shark and his structure with LVMH was just very much corporate. And Tom didn't really like that. You know, he liked the freedom of being able to do his own thing. So there is a article that Vanity Fair published in 1999. It's called Gucci versus Goliath. And that article covers all of the legal drama between Gucci and Bernard Arnault. I highly recommend that you go check it out. I'll make sure to include the link. It's free, it's a free read, and it's available online. But I'll just kind of speak to some of the high points of the article right now. So basically, Bernard positioned himself to take over Gucci um, by acquiring shares into the brand secretly, and essentially the only way that Tom Ford and Domenico would be able to escape the wrath of Bernard Arnault was if they were able to find a buyer that was in a position to outbid Bernard, and that was tough. So after many court hearings and failed meeting attempts, a white knight emerged. And this white knight, his name is Francois Pinault. He is he was based out of Paris, a business tycoon and of his own right. Some of the companies that he owned were the Christie's auction house. I think he owned Converse at the time and Samsonite luggage. But he got his start in the timber business in the 60s. But, he was a billionaire business tycoon himself. When he emerged and started having conversations with Domenico De Soleil and Tom Ford, he moved fast. I want to say I read like um after the first meeting with them, by day three, they were moving towards a contract. So Francois Pinault, he purchased a stake in Gucci, a 42% stake in Gucci for $3 billion. And at the same time of purchasing Gucci, he also acquired Yves Saint Laurent, 100% of Yves Saint Laurent. So basically, this is what started the Gucci Group, which is now known today as Kering. And I'll talk more about Kering in a later episode as well. So we have a lot of exciting things that we're gonna talk about in future episodes for sure. But let's go further into the Gucci Group. So after the deal with Francois Pinault was done, Tom Ford, in addition to his responsibilities with Gucci, he also became the creative director for Yves Saint Laurent. So between both brands, he was pushing out like 16 collections every year. So he was super busy. But in addition to both of those responsibilities, he also sat on the acquisitions committee for the Gucci Group to help identify other businesses worth investing in and partnering with. So let's talk about some of the companies that they acquired. So in 2001, they went on a buying spree. They acquired Bottega, Balenciaga, Alexander McQueen, and they also created a joint venture with Stella McCartney, who is the daughter of Paul McCartney from the Beatles. A quick fun fact: so with their acquisition of Alexander McQueen, that was low key. If you ask me, that was low key like a dig back at Bernard Arnault for all the drama that he put them through, because Alexander McQueen was the creative director of Givenchy. Givenchy was owned is owned by LVMH. So he was the creative director of Givenchy from 1996 through 2001. But he left LVMH because he felt stifled, going back to what I said earlier about LVMH having like a stiff corporate structure. And he also, on different accounts, expressed not being supported by Bernard Arnault overall. So he jumped ship and he formed a partnership with the Gucci Group. And here is why here is also where I credit Tom Ford for being a visionary. He's on record for speaking on how he felt like a lot of talent, creative talent, was in London. And that's where Alexander McQueen and Stella McCartney were based out of. So, to have that foresight to go to a creative hub such as London and, form those partnerships, that was a really big deal. But as we know, all good things must come to an end. After a legendary 10-year run with the Gucci Group and helping to form the Gucci Group, Tom Ford and Domenico De Soleil both parted ways with Gucci in 2004 due to not being able to reach amicable negotiations with um, the parent company of the Gucci Group, which Francois Pinault he owned. So they weren't able to reach an agreement, so they left. So now we're gonna fast forward to the Tom Ford brand days. So in 2005, Tom Ford created his eponymous brand. And what's dope about how the brand was created is they leveraged Tom Ford's previous experience as a creative director with Gucci and his celebrity. They leveraged that to create strategic partnerships with other companies when they formed the Tom Ford brand. So let's dive into it for a second. So, of course, Tom Ford was the creative director of his brand, while Domenico De Soleil maintained running things on the business operations. So, let's go into each category that the brand started with. So they kicked things off in 2005 with eyewear by partnering with a company that's called the Marcelin Group, which is an Italian eyewear manufacturer. So Tom Ford did a licensing deal with the Marcelin Group to handle the eyewear. Then in 2006, they introduced beauty, which consists of, fragrances and makeup and things of that nature. Um, that partnership was established with Estee Lauder. Now, keep that name in mind for later in the episode. But yeah, Beauty was launched in 2006. And also in 2006, menswear was launched. And the menswear line was a partnership with Zanya, the Zanya Group, which is this part of the business is my personal favorite because I personally feel like the menswear line for Tom Ford is like really the heart of the brand. But let's dive more into the Zanya partnership. So Zanya is an Italian luxury fashion and textile company that historically specializes in menswear. Um, they're known for high quality fabrics. So yeah, I think it was genius to lean on Zanga in that way for the partnership. Within their partnership, Zanga handled the production of garments, and they also introduced made to measure suiting, which proved to be super lucrative for Tom Ford brand in the early days. Um, and Zanya also handled the distribution of the menswear line. Um, as far as the wholesale relationships, because in the early days, Tom Ford was only outside of their own stores, directly owned retail stores. The only other ways you could shop the brand, as far as America is concerned, was through the Neiman Marcus Group. The Neiman Marcus Group, of course, owns Neiman Marcus, and they also own Bergdorf Goodman. So yeah, unless you went through a direct Tom Ford store or the Neiman Marcus Group, you couldn't shop the brand in the early days. Then in 2010, the women's line was introduced. And this is the only area of the business that was fully operated and ran by Tom Ford in house. Um, a quick fun fact is that for the introduction of his women's wear line, he did a private fashion show that was held at his store in New York off Madison Avenue. And he casted A-list celebrities like Julianne Moore and Beyonce to model in the fashion show. Um, and just to share like a few more of my personal insights with the brand, um, I remember when I first visited New York for the first time, which is my favorite city. Um, I had my wife, which was my girlfriend at the time. I had her and the people that we were with walk several blocks to go and visit the Tom Ford store just so I could see it and experience it in person. Like I was that much of a fan of the brand. And there's also a video on YouTube that I used to watch all the time where Tom Ford would give a tour of his store. And I'll include the link in wherever I post this at as well. And then lastly, I worked as an assistant buyer with Neiman Marcus for about 2 years. I worked in the men's division where I focused on tailored suiting, tailored clothing, and Tom Ford was one of the brands that I managed. So that was super dope. It was really like a full circle moment because I was able to um, because like I mentioned earlier, I used to go into Neiman Marcus and I just used to try on stuff knowing I couldn't afford it. So then when I scored that job with Neiman's and to then um be responsible for the Tom Ford men's line with Neiman's, it was just super dope, full circle moment. But all right, let's move on. So let's fast forward to November 2022. It gets announced that Estee Lauder would acquire Tom Ford for $2.8 billion. Dollars. And this deal would make Estee the sole owner of the brand and all of its intellectual properties. And to me, Estee Lauder being the owner, it makes sense because the Tom Ford beauty business was really the largest revenue driver within the business. And as I mentioned earlier, Estee Lauder was the licensee holder of it. So it makes sense that they would be the sole owner. So here are the details of the Estee Lauder acquisition of Tom Ford. Marcelin maintained their eyewear licensing deal with Tom Ford. Um, Marcelin paid Estee Lauder $250 million to be paid out at the close of the deal so that they could retain their eyewear license. And then Zanya became the sole licensee for Tom Ford Fashion, which would now include men's and women's wear. And they also would be responsible for the stores, the build out of the Tom Ford stores, and the fashion shows. And so, my personal thoughts on the deal is that I think the deal with Estee Lauder, the acquisition with Estee Lauder was super strategic still. You know, as I just mentioned, beauty was the largest revenue driver. So when you put Estee Lauder at the top, and then they were smart enough to divide and conquer to keep that same business flow going. They don't Estee Lauder doesn't specialize in fashion. So to continue the partnership with Zanga to handle fashion, that was smart. Same thing with eyewear for with Marcelin. Now, I think things could get tricky. The only way I could see this going left is if Estee Lauder, the people at Estee Lauder, if they, you know, try to position themselves as running the show, if you will. Like the fashion leg of the business is what drives the attention. Fashion shows is what gets people excited and wanting to aspire to be a part of a brand. And then you have your easy cash grabs like fragrances and makeup and things like that that come at an entry level price point, and it gives people the chance to be a part of the brand. So as long as they maintain that structure and allow the fashion leg to continue to be at the forefront and eyewear and beauty complement, I think it'll continue to be a fruitful partnership. Especially if they continue to have good creative directors, which leads me to my next point. So, after the acquisition, a gentleman by the name of Peter Hawkins, who is someone who used to work under Tom Ford directly, at the brand and even in the Gucci days. He became the creative director, but that didn't last very long because he stepped down shortly after. And early in 2024, a designer by the name of Hyder Ackerman was announced as the new creative director. And his first fashion show should be released this year, in 2025, so really soon. So I'm looking forward to seeing how things turn out with the newly appointed creative director and all the other recent changes that have happened. But yeah, man, as you can see, Tom Ford's career, um, nothing short of amazing. You see that it required um, instinct on the creative side, would also being complemented by strategic business decisions. And from this point on, he's definitely solidified as a legend in the fashion industry. From my point of view, especially on the creative and the business side of things. So shout out to Tom Ford for being um, a huge inspiration for myself and others. But yeah, man, as I've said before in the last episode, I view this podcast as a way to be transformative with my community and supporters. Um, just by sharing information and talking about my journey and things that I'm inspired by. So, what better way than to do an episode, fully dedicated to one of my main fashion inspirations, which is Tom Ford. So, but that also brings me to my next point, which is on the next episode, I'll be covering Stefan Eugene, my brand, which I'm wearing today. I'll be covering, how and why I started the brand and my vision for it and where I want to take it. So please join me on the next episode to talk about that. But yeah, man, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your family and friends, anybody who you know that appreciate this sort of fashion talk. Let's lock in and let's build together. And yeah, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Stefan underscore Eugene and TikTok Stefan Eugene no underscore. And yeah, until next time, may all your pain be champagne.